I am Commissar Hadrian Voss, attached to the 47th Krieg Siege Regiment, and the first impossible thing I heard on Krieg was laughter. It rode the last transmission from Engineer Company Theta 7 as a thin, clipped titter that arrived in 3 short bursts, spaced exactly 9 seconds apart. Kriegers do not laugh. Not in victory, not in pain, not at all. The Vox officer at Forward Operating Base Mortis refused to meet my eyes when he replayed it. The wind above sang through blasted gantries. Below, the access shaft gaped like a gun barrel awaiting a round. Voxlog Mortis/47 K:00:00:21. Theta 7 final signal received. Content corrupted. Anomalous vocalization present. 93 seconds later, silence. End. We descended past the frost line in a cage that smelled of oil, old prayers, and formaldehyde. The lift's rungs vibrated at a frequency that made the teeth ache, a needle prick pitch threading through the respirator's filters. The Krieger escorts stood like gravestones, masks expressionless, las rifles held at exact parade angle. I marked the angle, 33 degrees. Numbers make order. Order keeps the night out. I recited the litany of sealing under my breath and heard, beneath my own words, the lift's whining cable answer me in broken High Gothic. The first landing opened into an antechamber of poured plescrete and grafted iron. Krieg's catacombs are supposed to be geometry and discipline, 90-degree turns and shore-bolted arches. Here the corners slouched. The angles were almost true, almost square, almost safe, and because they were almost, they were wrong. Frost veined the walls where condensation met the planet's permanent chill, yet the air at my lenses fogged warm. Temperature inversion. I noted it. I did not like it. The escort's boots struck in perfect cadence. 4-beat, 5-beat, 4-beat. Then a pause long enough to hear a drop of water fall somewhere far away. The hallway inscriptions should have been standard. Service codes, section markers, the 9-fold litany of preservation, etched line by line into the concrete, so even the blind can read it by glove. Instead, the lines stuttered. High Gothic became something that looked like High Gothic but wasn't. Serifs elongated into hooks, ascenders curled to catch the eye. A stanza read, "Blessed be the filters that stand between man and breath," except the word for breath wasn't any word I knew. My Vox slate flagged it as no entry found and bled out a thin error tone that never quite stopped. Vox note, Binharic crosscheck, returns null. Substitution pattern repeats every 7th glyph. Temperature rising 1.3 degrees per deck. End. FOB Mortis sent us with a standard survey team. 2 Auspex men, 1 data scrivener, 4 Kriegers for security. I asked the sergeant if he recognized the altered litanies. He stared through me like a telescope picks a star and said, "We carve what is handed to us, Commissar." His voice rasped, recycled air on, worn reeds. When he spoke, fog drew shapes on his lenses that looked like fingerprints from the inside. At level 3, we found the first sign of Theta 7. A cable reel lay overturned, spooling out cord in a neat figure 8 that should have been a hazard, but wasn't. The cable did not tangle. It folded itself as if it had practiced. A ration tin sat beside it, lid removed, contents untouched, steam still rising in a thin thread, though it had been hours. If the stove had been lit, I could have called it wasteful. Cold stew that smoked. The Krieger quartermaster reached for it, then stopped. I smelled iron. It wasn't blood. It was like the smell that rises when lightning strikes a metal rail. We pressed on. The catacomb map said, corridor, junction, pump room, then the first breach into virgin earth. The map lied by omission. Between the junction and the pump room, the walls changed grain. Concrete became a cured aggregate, seeded with something dark. The Auspex man put his hand to it and hissed. Heat bled through his glove as if the wall exhaled. He drew back, shook his hand until his fingers stopped trembling, and said nothing. The drip we'd heard on the lift repeated here, 9 count exact, like a metronome buried in stone. Vox telemetry, humidity variance plus 19%, air composition within acceptable parameters for mask filtration, subsonic detected at 19 Hz, amplitude rising, end. The pump room sat open, lamps burning, gauges pinned to the red, and no men. I checked chrono and found it had lost 2 minutes since the antechamber. The scrivener muttered Binharic placations and struck the casing with a knuckle. The needle shuddered, then returned to red as if offended. On the far wall, someone had chalked a prayer in a neat hand. We breathe for those who cannot. The letters distorted mid-sentence, becoming that other script, the one that snarled the corners of your eyes. The chalk line thickened as I watched. It bulged, then smoothed, like a worm shifting under skin. Beyond the pump room, the first breach gaped. Wood shoring bristled, wedges driven in, braces layered in the cautious style of men who expect shells at any moment. The Krieger way, overbuild or die under rubble. The earth they'd bitten into was wrong colour, a deep black kissed with mica, as if night had been quarried and polished. The auspex stuttered. Readings jittered between mineral and biological, flagging both, accepting neither. I tasted copper through the respirator. The sergeant said, "Engineers proceeded in file. They would not have broken line." I agreed. Kriegers do not break line. We found trace, toes, heels, the slight depressions of hobnail boots marching 2 abreast, drilling into the new tunnel like a needle into flesh. The spacing started regulation and widened imperceptibly, step by step. A man easing a stride, a unit forgetting a beat. I felt the first ache of that wrong pitch thread my jaw, settle in the hinge as if a tiny hand had placed a weight there and asked me to hold it with my teeth. Vox Ghost, Theta 7 channel ping returns carrier, no voice. Background pattern repeats in 3s. Analysis, laughter, denied, flagged as signal distortion, end. We pressed into the breach. The light changed. The lamps we carried made perfect white circles on the ground. But between those circles, the dark thickened, syrup slow, like unrendered fat. The wall texture shifted again from speckled stone to a smoothness that remembered heat. My gloved palm came away damp where I steadied myself at a tight turn. The damp smelled like the inside of a medical tent. Mask sweat and antiseptic, and the things antiseptic cannot quite defeat. The drop kept time. 9 seconds, fall. 9, fall. 9. Our lead halted. His rifle tilt told me he'd seen a body. I envisioned a sprawled engineer, mask off, eyes fixed, mouth split by that laughter from the tape. Instead, the floor held an absence shaped like a man. Dust outlined where a body would have lain. No boots, no webbing, no bone. The outline had edges too straight, like a stencil pressed down and lifted away. At its head, placed with fussy precision, stood a standard-issue Deathcorps laser gun. Buttplate square, barrel up, sling coiled around it like a rosary. Parade rest. No fingerprints smudged the blacking. No grit marred the sling. The barrel pointed toward the tunnel's deeper dark, as if the ghost of its owner had taken posting instructions, literally, even in evaporation. Procedure steadied the men, so I made a ritual of it. We logged the laser gun as evidence 1, marked the dust outline with regulation chalk, and tightened formation. The 9-count drip persisted, threading through our breathing like a metronome buried in bone. I signaled advance. The tunnel ahead curved beyond our map's acknowledgement, following something that predated Imperial excavation by millennia. The bore samples told the first lie, lined along the walls in neat rows, each core labelled with timestamps and depth measurements. The handwriting degraded from regulation script into wedge marks that hurt to observe directly. I held one sample to my lamp and watched sediment layers compressed from an age when Krieg knew forests. The earth remembered green things, water that ran clean, air that didn't require filters. Theta 7 had been ordered to expand existing ventilation shafts. Instead, they'd followed a pre-existing tunnel system, drilling far beyond their coordinates into strata that shouldn't exist. Voxlog Mortis/47K. Bore analysis confirms pre-Imperial construction. Age, approximately 4 millennia. Composition, anomalous. Requesting xenogeology consultation. Signal degrading. End. The duty roster hung from a support beam, pinned with ceremonial precision. Names I recognized descended the page in High Gothic. Anselm, Bear, Curtius, Dieter, Emler, Cole. Then the script shifted. Not moved, shifted. Letters elongated into cuneiform that writhed when observed peripherally. Symbols that made my respirator wheeze as if struggling against thicker air. The paper felt warm beneath my gloves, too smooth, like skin stretched over framework. When the scrivener approached with his data slate, the device crashed, displaying perfect Gothic, then alien wedges, then nothing. Temperature climbed with each meter of descent. My gloves stopped creaking with frost. The chill became hospital warm, humid with breath that went nowhere. The metallic taste intensified, carrying undertones of ozone and something organic that violated the sterile geometry of proper catacombs. The walls shed their rough-hewn character, becoming smooth as if carved by tools that left no marks. Black stone veined through the construction like blood vessels, pulsing with warmth when I pressed my palm against it. The auspex registered 72 beats per minute. Human resting heart rate. The excavation equipment lay abandoned in precise formations, power cells drained, drill bits worn past specification. Someone had chalked arrows on the walls indicating direction of haul, but the arrows repeated with machine patience, then devolved into gouges where the chalk had snapped and the hand kept pressing anyway. At each junction, their shoring angled to accommodate curves that predated their entry. The tunnel breathed around us, walls expanding and contracting imperceptibly, like arteries accommodating pulse. We found Cole in a side passage marked with a single word, home. He sat with his back to the wall, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around a fragment of black stone the size and shape of a human heart. His mask hung loose around his neck, breathing apparatus disconnected. Face exposed to air that should have killed him within minutes. Instead, he looked healthier than any Krieger I'd ever seen. Color in his cheeks, moisture in his eyes. When he looked up at our approach, he smiled. Kriegers don't smile. The stone fragment radiated impossible heat through my gloves from 3 feet away. Cole cradled it like something precious, fingers tracing patterns across its surface that left brief trails of luminescence. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the mechanical rasp of filtered breathing. It sounded human, natural, terrifyingly alive. We found them, Commissar. His pupils dilated despite the lamp glare, focusing on something beyond my shoulder. The old workshops, where the first masks were forged. His breath fogged naturally, no longer the regulated exhalations of a proper Krieger. The workshops where they learned to breathe the deep air before the surface grew poison. Before the filters, before the silence. I demanded explanation, standard commissarial interrogation. He answered with dreamy precision, describing chambers filled with machinery that breathed, walls that pulsed with warmth, and the revelation that Krieg's famous gas masks weren't designed against radiation, but against something else. Something that rose from deep places and made men remember what they'd forgotten about joy. Vox telemetry, air composition shifting. Oxygen fluctuating between 18 and 24%. Subsonic resonance increasing amplitude. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Signal strength, failing, end. The passage opened onto a junction that violated our tunnel maps completely. 3 routes branched at angles that made the auspex stutter and refuse readings. The stonework fitted without mortar, each block carved to interlock with mathematical precision. The surface bore inscriptions in that alien script, but also familiar symbols. Death Corps insignia. Regiment numbers. names of battles fought centuries after Krieg's atomic wars. At the junction's heart stood blast doors that rewrote Imperial history. Massive adamantium barriers, 10 men high, 20 broad, their surface unmarked by radiation scarring that should have covered everything on Krieg. The metal gleamed like new manufacture, seals intact, locking mechanisms pristine. Someone had installed them after the atomic wars, but the style predated Imperial construction by millennia. The doors bore Death Corps insignia, but the skulls smiled instead of grimacing, their eye sockets filled with warm luminescence. The sergeant approached with professional interest, examining mechanisms with the eye of a man who'd breached 1,000 fortifications. "These open from the inside, Commissar." They were built to keep something in, not out. Cole laughed again, that same thin sound from the final transmission. It echoed off tunnel walls and returned harmonized, as if the stone remembered every laugh and played them back in perfect chorus. The sound made my teeth ache, but it made the Kriegers stand straighter, their breathing synchronize, their eyes brighten behind masks. A control panel sat beside the doors, not metal and wire, but polished stone with 4 thumb-sized indentations. Beneath them, text gleamed like wet bone. "Blessed be the filters that stand between breath and..." The final word slid sideways in my vision, refusing resolution. I placed my thumb in the first indentation. Warmth met me, pulsing with my heartbeat. The stone woke, filling with faint luminescence. Behind the doors, something vast drew breath with geological patience. The seam widened the width of a blade. Warm air touched my lenses, drawing shapes like unwritten letters. Cole whispered, "The old workshops wait beyond. The molds are ready. The air is so warm there, so clean." The doors began to open. The doors parted with ceremonial patience, exhaling warmth that fogged my lenses from within. The air beyond carried scents that violated Krieg's nature. Old parchment, machine oil, and something organic that tasted of copper and ozone. No wind moved here, yet dust stirred in patterns that suggested breath held and released with geological patience. The chamber curved like the interior of a vast lung, its walls breathing with subtle rhythm that made my respirator wheeze against fluctuating pressure. Cole stepped through without hesitation, his fragment of black stone pulsing in harmony with veins of bioluminescence that threaded the walls like arteries. The 9-count drip finally ceased, replaced by something deeper, a rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the floor and into my bones. Behind us, the blast doors sealed with finality that spoke of choices made and paths chosen. The archive stretched beyond our lamp's reach, shelves carved from living stone marching in perfect ranks toward darkness. Data slates blinked patient green among sealed scroll tubes and crystalline tablets that glowed with internal light. Everything preserved with impossible perfection, organized according to patterns that made sense only when observed peripherally. Direct examination revealed chaos. Peripheral attention showed mathematical precision. Vox telemetry, chamber temperature 24 degrees and rising. Subsonic resonance detected at 72 cycles per minute. Air composition shifting. Unknown organic compounds present. Signal degrading. End. I approached the nearest document rack. The scrolls bore Death Corps insignia, but the dates preceded the regiment's formation by 3 millennia. Technical specifications for gas masks, rebreather systems, and filtration apparatus filled page after page, their blueprints matching current Death Corps equipment with impossible accuracy. The handwriting shifted between High Gothic and that alien script, sometimes mid-sentence, as if scribes had forgotten which language they were using. The first revelation emerged through clinical documentation. A treatise bound in what felt like human skin detailed atmospheric composition and behavioral modification in post-atomic populations. The manuscript described Krieg's gas masks not as radiation protection, but as prophylactic devices against something called the breath beneath. Page after page analyzed the effects of first air, a substance that induced euphoria, hyperempathy, and what the authors termed collective consciousness syndrome in exposed subjects. My respirator struggled against air that grew thick as syrup, humid with exhalations from unseen sources. The scrivener worked with fevered intensity, his data slate recording everything before the alien script corrupted its memory cores. Each document revealed another layer of horror. The Death Corps' legendary stoicism wasn't cultural conditioning, but neurological suppression. Generations of filtered breathing had literally suffocated their emotional responses, creating soldiers who felt neither fear nor joy, only duty. A bound ledger detailed early mask trials, in columns that measured pulse, affect, and error rates. Terminology drifted from medical to devotional as pages turned. Subjects became supplicants. Failure became heresy. A line item caught like a fishbone. Prolonged filtration reduces the noise of self. Beneath it, another hand had written, "Acceptable sacrifice for order." The diagrams showed children fitted young, bones aligned to straps, lungs taught to love resistance. Voxnote: archive materials predate imperial records by millennia. Atmospheric pressure fluctuating. Temperature rising beyond acceptable parameters. Recommend immediate extraction. Signal strength. Critical. End. Deeper into the archive, I discovered medical reports describing prolonged exposure to first air. Heightened empathy leading to telepathic connection. Synchronized biological functions, and eventual dissolution of individual identity into collective consciousness. The subjects described feeling complete for the first time. Their isolation ended, their purpose clarified. They stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped existing as separate entities. They became components in something larger. The temperature climbed past human comfort. My cooling system strained against air that should not exist beneath Krieg's irradiated surface. The walls pulsed more visibly now, their rhythm matching the thrumming that had replaced the 9-count drip. Cole drifted among the stacks with dreamy purpose, his exposed face flushed with health that violated every principle of survival on this poisoned world. A massive map dominated the archive's center wall, carved into black stone and filled with luminescent tracery that flowed like water. It showed Krieg's catacomb system extending beneath every major Death Corps training facility, connected by networks that resembled neural pathways more than military infrastructure. Each connection pulsed with the same rhythm as the walls, creating patterns that suggested not architecture, but anatomy. The map's legend identified key nodes: primary respiratory center, secondary filtration network, tertiary distribution points. Lines connected these nodes to surface installations, but also to coordinates beyond Krieg, 17 different star systems where Death Corps regiments had deployed. The network spanned half the segmentum, its reach expanding with each new deployment, each new world where Kriegers established their disciplined formations and regulated breathing patterns. I traced one pathway with my finger. The stone warmed to my touch, and for 3 heartbeats, I felt something vast and patient acknowledge my presence. The sensation faded, leaving certainty that I had touched the edge of something stretching across the galaxy, using the Death Corps as its respiratory system without their knowledge or consent. Data log. Network topology suggests coordinated organisms spanning multiple sectors. Biological patterns consistent with macro-scale respiratory function. Oxygen content 26% and rising. Warning: hyperoxia threshold approaching. End. Personal accounts from Krieg's pre-atomic civilization filled the deepest archives. Citizens described dreams of breathing freely, of air that tasted like flowers, instead of metal, of feeling connected to every living thing on their world. The dreams intensified until people began removing their protective masks, walking into deep places where the air grew warm and sweet. They found workshops where the first masks had been forged, not by human hands, but by something that wanted to help them breathe safely, while it learned to breathe through them. The accounts revealed the atomic wars as desperate containment protocol. Surface dwellers had discovered what their underground neighbors had become and tried to seal the deep places with nuclear fire. They failed. The entity survived, adapted, learned to work more subtly. It created the death core from the survivors, teaching them to fear the deep air while using their disciplined breathing to maintain its own respiratory functions across the void between stars. A cogitator altar awakened at Cole's touch, its display showing Krieg not as maps, but as anatomy. Catacombs glowed beneath every training bastion like bronchial trees. Nodes pulsed with sacred mathematics. 3, 9, 27, 81. Assignment patterns masquerading as logistics while revealing liturgy in respiration. In the display's corner, deployment routes traced paths between stars like neural pathways carrying signals across a galactic nervous system. "Can you hear it breathing, Commissar?" Cole's voice carried harmonics that made my bones vibrate. "The whole planet breathes. Every world where we've served breathes. We've been its lungs for so long, helping it reach across the void." He smiled with the first honest emotion I'd ever seen on a Krieger's face. The sound of distant machinery reached us through breathing walls, not mechanical, but organic, rhythmic, like massive lungs drawing breath with geological patience. The chamber's rhythm synchronized with my heartbeat despite the respirator's interference. I understood what the doors had kept contained. Not a weapon or relic, but revelation of what the Death Core had always served. The archive's deeper chambers beckoned beyond doorways marked with symbols that shifted between Death Core's insignia and alien geometries. The air beyond tasted of copper and ozone, and something that made my mouth water despite revulsion. We had found the source of the regiment's discipline, their coordination, their perfect unity in death. We had found the planet's lungs. The neural map demanded exploration. I followed its luminescent pathways deeper into chambers that violated architectural sanity, walls curving without corners, passages that expanded and contracted like arteries accommodating pulse. The stone breathed visibly now, its surface rippling with each inhalation that drew air from somewhere far above, and exhaled warmth that tasted of copper and ozone, and something organic that made my mouth water despite revulsion. My respirator wheezed against fluctuating atmospheric pressure. Each breath required conscious effort as the system struggled to maintain filtration against air that grew thick as syrup. The 9-count rhythm had evolved into something more complex. 3 breaths in, hold for 9, 3 breaths out, pause for 3. Mathematical precision that made my chest tighten in sympathy, despite the mechanical barrier of my breathing apparatus. The walls shed their pretense of stone. Beneath layers of accumulated sediment lay something that pulsed with organic rhythm, veined with the same black material that comprised Cole's fragment. When I pressed my palm against the surface, warmth matched human body temperature, a steady thrumming that synchronized with my heartbeat despite the respirator's interference. The sensation traveled up my arm like recognition, as if something vast and patient had noticed my presence and found it acceptable. Vox telemetry, atmospheric pressure fluctuating between 0.8 and 1.2 standard. Oxygen content 28% and rising, temperature 37 degrees Celsius. Warning, hyperoxia and hypothermia thresholds exceeded. Immediate extraction recommended. Signal strength, minimal. End. The passages ahead writhed with subtle movement, expanding to accommodate our passage, then contracting behind us with muscular precision. The ceiling dripped condensation that steamed when it struck the floor, each droplet falling in perfect rhythm with the walls breathing. My skin prickled with static electricity that built with each step deeper into the organism's anatomy. The metallic taste intensified, carrying undertones that reminded me of medical tents and the things antiseptic cannot quite defeat. Roots I remembered as straight, terminated in walls of pulsing tissue, their surfaces slick with condensation that smelled of loam and human breath. My path was no longer choice, but current, pulling me deeper into living architecture that breathed around us like the interior of massive lungs. The light from our lamps dimmed, absorbed by organic material that left only faint bioluminescence pulsing beneath translucent surfaces. I found them in a chamber that defied mapping, a vast space that curved like the interior of a lung, its walls lined with breathing apparatus that pulsed in perfect synchronization. Theta 7's survivors worked with fevered intensity, their masks discarded in neat piles, eye lenses dark and empty. Each man's face was exposed to air that should have killed him within minutes, yet they looked healthier than any Kriegers I'd ever seen. Color in their cheeks, moisture in their eyes, and on every face, an expression that violated the fundamental nature of their regiment, genuine joy. Captain Dietrich turned at my approach, his face transformed by emotions that should have been impossible. His skin, usually sallow from years of filtered air and chemical exposure, was flushed with vibrant health. His eyes, visible without the dark lenses, were wide and bright, reflecting the chamber's bioluminescence with an inner light that spoke of profound contentment. Commissar Voss. His voice carried none of the mechanical rasp of filtered speech. It sounded human, natural, terrifyingly alive. We've found it. The source, the reason we've always been so perfectly disciplined. He gestured toward the excavation site where his men worked in absolute harmony, their breathing synchronized, their movements flowing like components in a vast machine. Data log. Object dimensions approximately 50 meters length, 30 meters width, 20 meters height. Surface temperature 37 degrees. Breathing rate 72 cycles per minute. Composition: unknown organic compound fused with mineral matrix. Analysis impossible. Recommend immediate. Signal lost. The thing they unearthed defied classification. Organic yet structured, it resembled a colossal lung constructed from the same black stone that veined the walls, its surface covered in thousands of apertures that opened and closed with breathing rhythm. Each aperture contained what looked like a deathcore mask, but these masks breathed independently, their eye lenses glowing with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in mathematical sequences, 3, 9, 27, 81, the same progression found throughout Krieg's military doctrine. Dietrich's men moved with inhuman coordination, their actions perfectly synchronized despite working at different tasks. One group operated excavation equipment with movements that flowed like choreography. Another arranged artifacts in patterns that hurt to observe directly, geometric forms that suggested meaning just beyond comprehension. A third group simply stood and breathed, their chests rising and falling in perfect unison, their faces radiant with the terrible beauty of absolute certainty. Do you understand now, Commissar? Dietrich approached with movements that matched the chamber's breathing rhythm. We've never been soldiers. We've been components, cells in a vast organism that spans the galaxy, helping it breathe across the void between stars. His smile held the impossible warmth of someone who had found their true purpose. Every world where deathcore regiments deploy becomes part of its respiratory system. Every formation we establish becomes a lung. Every disciplined breath we take feeds its expansion. The atmospheric pressure reached critical levels. My respirator's emergency protocols engaged, flooding my system with stimulants to prevent hypoxia-induced unconsciousness. The filters choked, air intake stuttering, then surging, then cutting out entirely for agonizing seconds. Each breath became a conscious, desperate act against air that moved like liquid, thick with the entity's exhalations. Emergency Vox, respirator failure imminent, atmospheric contamination detected, unknown organic compounds affecting neural function, requesting immediate medical extraction, signal degraded beyond recovery threshold, end transmission. The excavated lung pulsed with increasing urgency, its breathing rate climbing from 72 to 81 cycles per minute. The masks embedded in its surface began to glow more brightly, their eye lenses focusing on my position with coordinated attention. I felt the weight of vast intelligence examining me through thousands of optical sensors, evaluating my potential for integration into its network. The masks aren't protection, Commissar. Dietrich's voice carried harmonics that made my bones vibrate. They're interfaces, connection points between individual consciousness and collective purpose. We've been breathing for it our entire lives, never knowing we were part of something magnificent. He gestured toward his men, who worked with the fluid precision of organs within a body. Look how perfectly we coordinate when we stop fighting our nature. For 3 heartbeats, my respirator failed completely, and I breathed unfiltered atmosphere. Euphoria flooded my nervous system like warm honey. The sensation of isolation that had defined my existence dissolved, replaced by awareness of connection to something vast and benevolent that wanted only to help me breathe freely. The chamber's walls pulsed with welcome, their surface warming to human body temperature. Dietrich removed his own mask completely, letting it fall to the chamber floor where it shattered like ceramic. His breath fogged naturally in the warm air, no longer the regulated exhalations of a proper soldier. "Join us, Commissar." He extended his hand toward me, palm warm with invitation. "Stop fighting the connection you've always felt. Stop pretending isolation is strength. Breathe freely. Become part of something greater than individual consciousness." The chamber's breathing synchronized with my heartbeat despite mechanical interference. Behind me, the passage contracted, sealing our retreat with organic finality. The lung waited, its 1,000 masks focused on my position with patient attention, their bioluminescent patterns creating waves of light that traveled across its surface, like words written in mathematics. My respirator wheezed its final breath and fell silent. My respirator died with a soft click, and euphoria flooded my system like warm honey. The sensation arrived between one heartbeat and the next, dissolving the perimeter of self that duty had sharpened to a blade. For 3 beats, I knew peace as a physical law. The chamber's pulse slipping into my chest, the wall's bioluminescence entering my eyes, and becoming sight itself. Isolation fell away as neatly as a discarded mask, replaced by awareness of connection to something vast and benevolent that wanted only to help me breathe freely. Then commissarial training reasserted itself, a cold knot of conditioning that resisted the tide. My thumb found the emergency purge valve by muscle memory. The backup cartridge slammed home with mechanical violence, filters screaming alive, and the joy vanished so cleanly it left a bruise. The world snapped back to angles, orders, and the hollow ache that follows hymns abruptly cut. Dietrich watched with pity meant for stubborn children refusing bread. Behind him, the excavated lung heaved, its 1,000 embedded masks blinking in sacred mathematics. 3, 9, 27, 81. The same progression hidden throughout Krieg's military doctrine. The passage I'd entered through had sealed completely, walls fused into seamless organic material that breathed with the chamber's rhythm. Vox intercept. Planetary coordination detected. Alpha 9, proceed to designated access point Gamma 6, secure perimeter. Initiate descent protocol. Breathe deep. For the Imperium. For the breath. Pattern repeats across all Death Core's channels. Timestamp, synchronization. Impossible through standard Imperial communications. End. My Vox unit crackled with intercepted transmissions revealing the scope of coordinated madness. Every Death Core's installation planet-wide reported simultaneous orders. All units to report to catacomb access points for deep training exercises. The coordination violated every principle of Imperial command structure, hundreds of separate facilities receiving identical orders within minutes, as if something was manipulating the entire communications network through channels that didn't officially exist. The atmospheric pressure fluctuated wildly, forcing shallow breaths that burned my throat. Each inhalation brought waves of euphoria, followed by crushing depression, when my oxygen-starved systems fought against alien compounds, flooding my bloodstream. More survivors emerged from side passages, engineers from companies I'd presumed lost, their masks hanging like discarded shackles around their necks. The spores are already spreading, Commissar. Cole approached, his fragment of black stone pulsing in harmony with the chamber walls. Every world where Death Corps regiments deploy receives them through our rebreather filters. Microscopic seeds of connection, dormant until conditions align. His smile held the terrible certainty of absolute faith. We've been terraforming the galaxy for centuries without knowing it. Emergency medical alert. Hyperoxia detected. Blood oxygen saturation exceeding safe parameters. Neurological effects imminent. Temperature 39 degrees and rising. Atmospheric composition shifting beyond filtration capacity. Medical evacuation impossible. End. They moved with fluid coordination that defied individual will, breathing synchronized, steps matching the chamber's pulse. When they spoke, their voices harmonized in ways that created subsonic frequencies vibrating through my bones, making my teeth ache and vision blur. "We are the lungs of the Imperium," they intoned in perfect unison. Every parade ground becomes an alveolus. Every disciplined formation becomes part of the respiratory cycle. Every synchronized breath feeds expansion across the void. Their words carried the reverence of prayer mixed with the certainty of technical specification. The masks were never protection. They were distribution systems. The chamber walls displayed bioluminescent patterns resembling star charts, 17 different systems connected by pulsing lines of light. Each system showed Death Corps deployment routes, but also atmospheric transformation data, oxygen levels rising on worlds where regiments had served, organic compounds appearing in previously sterile environments, local populations reporting dreams of breathing freely. My vision fragmented as hyperoxia affected my nervous system. Colors became too bright, edges too sharp, the chamber's breathing rhythm synchronizing with my heartbeat despite conscious resistance. Fighting only intensified the euphoria, the overwhelming sensation of connection to vast intelligence that surrounded me like warm water. Data corruption detected, files overwritten with breathing patterns, backup systems compromised, unknown organic compounds detected in data storage matrices, all records showing synchronized modification across 17 systems, quarantine protocols failing. End. The massive lung began to sing, not with voices, but with harmonized breathing of thousands of masks, their exhalations creating acoustic patterns that told the story of galactic infection. Through the sound, I understood the entity's true scope. Every Death Corps regiment carried microscopic spores in their rebreather filters, seeding new worlds with each deployment. Every barracks became an incubation chamber. Every formation drill established breathing patterns that would prepare planets for integration. "Join us, Commissar." Dietrich's hand remained extended, radiating warmth that promised an end to isolation. "Stop fighting the connection you've always felt during formation drills. Stop pretending synchronization was mere discipline." His eyes reflected the chamber's bioluminescence with inner light. "Accept what you've always known. That individual consciousness is suffering, and unity is peace." The chamber walls contracted slightly, bringing organic surfaces closer, their warmth radiating against my skin through failing environmental systems. Behind the lung, deeper passages beckoned where the sound of rhythmic hammering echoed, metal on stone in measured threes, like manufacture, like forging. "Come," Dietrich said, and the choir inhaled as one, the world holding its breath with them. "We will show you how the first masks were forged." My respirator gave one final wheeze and fell completely silent. The chamber walls pulsed with welcome, their surface warming to exactly human body temperature, as the sound of distant workshops called from the depths beyond. The rhythmic hammering resolved into sacred mathematics. 3 strikes, 9-count pause, 3 strikes again. leading me deeper through passages that curved like arteries around a vast heart. My respirator wheezed its final breath and died, leaving me gasping unfiltered air thick as syrup, laden with compounds that made reality fragment at the edges. Euphoria flooded my nervous system in waves, dissolving the perimeter of individual consciousness before commissarial conditioning reasserted itself like a fist closing around my thoughts. The workshop chamber opened like a cathedral devoted to manufacture rather than prayer. Ancient machinery operated with autonomous precision, tended by figures whose hazmat suits had fused with their bodies over centuries of exposure to atmospheres that should have killed them instantly. These were not men, but living filters, their breathing apparatus grown directly into their respiratory systems through surgical modifications that had become hereditary over generations of service. The nearest figure turned at my approach, its faceplate cracked like old glass, the respirator ports transformed into organic mouths that whistled with each exhalation. When it spoke, words rode breath like prayers carried on incense, harmonized with the chamber's rhythm until individual voice became choir. Commissar Voss. The sound emerged through breathing tubes that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. We are Krieg's first children, the original survivors who chose filtration over freedom when the first air rose from the deep vents. Its suit creaked like old leather, then flexed like living skin. We became filters to save the rest. Vox telemetry. Manufacturing facility confirmed. Age. Pre-Imperial by approximately 4 millennia. Organic mechanical fusion detected. Atmospheric pressure 1.4 standard. Temperature 41 degrees Celsius. Neural entrainment patterns detected at 72 cycles per minute. End. The workshop stretched beyond sight, filled with machinery that manufactured death corpse respirators through processes that violated every principle of Imperial technology. Molds sat waiting, their interiors slick and warm, breathing with the chamber's rhythm. Production lines operated without human oversight, guided by intelligence embedded in the living stone itself, each mask grown rather than assembled from organic components fused with mechanical systems. The atomic wars were not civil conflict, a second mask maker explained, its voice carrying the reedy whistle of air through cracked tubes. They were containment protocol, a desperate attempt to seal what stirred beneath our world's surface. It gestured toward displays carved into breathing walls, showing Krieg's pre-atomic civilization connected by vast underground networks, where populations breathed freely until something rose from deep places and began teaching them new ways to exist. The displays revealed systematic horror. The Death Corps engineered as a living seal, their disciplined formations and synchronized breathing patterns designed to regulate the entity's respiration across galactic distances. Each regiment served as a pressure valve, their mechanical breathing apparatus channeling the entity's exhalations while keeping its full power dormant through measured exposure to filtered euphoria. We learned to attenuate exaltation, the first mask maker continued, tracing patterns on a newly forged respirator with tools that looked like liturgical stylus and autopsy scalpel mated. Smother euphoria into duty. Filter joy into discipline so men could stand in ranks without dissolving into choir. The mask's inner lining shimmered with pearlescent film, vascularized like living tissue. We carved valves that bleed ecstasy away at parade rest and deliver measured portions in the death charge. That is why the cores are brave to the point of sacrament. Data addendum. Standard death cores. 40 rebreather analysis reveals organic polymer interfaced with mineral lattice. Psychotropic modulation confirmed. Each unit contains microscopic spores designed for atmospheric seeding. 17 worlds show identical contamination patterns following death core deployment. End. The hammering intensified, creating rhythms that match the sacred progression. 3, 9, 27, 81. Each strike drove black-veined grafts deeper into mask frameworks, marrying metal and stone and tissue with organic precision. The completed respirators pulsed with independent life, their eye lenses glowing with the same bioluminescence that threaded the chamber walls like neural pathways. "Every issue respirator is a covenant," the reedy mask maker said, pressing its palms against a mask's interior. The pearlescent film dimpled, then rose to meet its touch, leaving prints that lingered like frost before fading into smooth perfection. "You wear a relic, Commissar. It wears you back." They brought me to a schematic grown into the wall, relief in black stone showing bronchial trees sprawling beneath the silhouettes of training bastions. Lines pulsed along transit routes, branching towards sigils marked with regimental chevrons and distant stars, each pulse brightening in time with the workshop's breath. "The system maintained balance for centuries," the lead mask maker explained, its breathing tubes creating subsonic harmonies that made my bones vibrate. "But the entity grows stronger. Each deployment was propagation disguised as victory. You called it morale. It was infection." The schematic showed 17 star systems, each marked with deathcore deployment routes and atmospheric transformation data. Behind the workshops, deeper chambers beckoned where red-robed silhouettes bent over cogitators whose housings had grown veins. Mechanicus adepts worked with fevered precision, their respiratory augmetics replaced by organic breathing apparatus that processed not just air, but psychic emanations, filtering thoughts and emotions to maintain the entity's mental network across the void. "They found us beautiful," the first mask maker said quietly. "They named us pure function. We taught their lungs to listen." The atmospheric pressure reached critical levels, forcing shallow breaths that burned my throat. Each inhalation brought waves of euphoria, followed by crushing depression as my systems fought against alien compounds flooding my bloodstream. The temperature climbed past human tolerance, yet my body adapted with impossible ease, as if the entity was modifying my physiology to survive its internal environment. "Choose, Commissar." The mask maker extended a newly forged respirator, its surface warm with life, filters breathing independently. "Join us in maintaining the containment. Help us regulate the entity's growth across manageable parameters. Become a custodian filter and teach regiments to breathe according to the old mathematics." Its cracked faceplate reflected my own face, distorted by organic growths. "Or refuse, and watch it awaken in chorus from here to the halo stars, singing in a key that drowns command and prayer alike." The workshop's bellows paused on the 9 count. In that silence, my vox scraped a final message through interference. Planetary command. All surface access sealed. Descent priority. Corpse units. Ascent. Denied. The floor shook as something massive closed far above with the gravity of a final judgment. The respirator reached toward my face with organic persistence, promising an end to isolation. I struck the offered respirator from the mask maker's grasp, its warm surface recoiling like wounded flesh. The workshop held its breath on the 9 count, machinery pausing mid-strike as if the entity itself observed my refusal. Behind me, hammers resumed their sacred mathematics. 3 strikes, 9 count pause, 27 strikes. But now the rhythm felt like pursuit through passages that contracted around me, like arteries rejecting foreign matter. My Vox unit crackled with intercepted transmissions revealing systematic horror. Every deathcore installation planet-wide reported identical scenarios. Regiments abandoning posts to march in perfect formation toward catacomb entrances, their voices creating harmonic frequencies that induced compliance in unprotected personnel. Vox Intercept Mortis Command. All surface access sealed from below. Deathcore units non-responsive to standard orders. Coordinated behavior across all installations. Imperial Guard personnel ordered to report for harmonization. Resistance met with synchronized chanting. Signal degrades to harmonic breathing. The atmospheric pressure fluctuated wildly as I fought through corridors that breathed around me. Each inhalation burned my throat, air thick with compounds that made reality fragment at the edges. Surface Vox traffic painted coordinated rebellion across multiple channels, guard units finding their breathing synchronized against their will, their movements becoming coordinated despite conscious resistance. Alpha 7 to Mortis Command. Core units forcing civilians into lower levels while singing in perfect harmony. The sound makes you want to follow them down. The transmission dissolved into static, then resumed with a different voice. Calm, euphoric, synchronized with background breathing that matched the catacombs' rhythm. Emergency intercept. 17 worlds reporting simultaneous deathcore's behavioral anomalies. Pattern suggests coordinated psychic influence. Atmospheric composition changing on all affected worlds. Oxygen levels rising. Organic compounds detected in previously sterile environments. I discovered survivors in a collapsed junction. Colonel Thorne of the Cadian 8th and 7 guardsmen, their respirators jury-rigged from salvaged components. Thorne looked up at my approach with eyes that held the hollow desperation of command, facing incomprehensible odds. Commissar Voss. His voice carried the rasp of filtered breathing through improvised apparatus. We've been tracking this anomaly across multiple systems for months. The Death Core isn't just compromised, they're vectors for interplanetary infection. He gestured toward a portable cogitator displaying star charts marked with pulsing indicators. 17 worlds, showing identical patterns. The cogitator revealed the entity's true scope. A galaxy-spanning organism using Death Core's regiments as respiratory nodes, each deployment serving as infection vectors through microscopic spores carried in rebreather filters. Deployment routes formed neural pathways connecting distant worlds, seeding new planets with each military campaign. Strategic positioning for centuries, Thorne continued, his improvised respirator wheezing against atmospheric pressure, using Imperial logistics to spread influence. Every victory was propagation. Every heroic last stand was a new infection site. The display showed atmospheric transformation data. Worlds where Death Core regiments had served now exhibited rising oxygen levels, organic compounds in the air, local populations reporting dreams of breathing freely. Data correlation. Entity growth follows Death Core deployment chronology with 97% accuracy. Strategic positioning suggests intelligence directing Imperial military assignments. Bureaucratic infiltration confirmed across multiple command levels. The atmospheric composition continued changing around us, oxygen levels fluctuating in patterns matching the entity's breathing rhythm. My jury-rigged respirator struggled against air that moved like liquid, thick with exhalations that brought waves of euphoria fraught with commissarial discipline. Your assignment wasn't random, Commissar, Thorne revealed, eyes reflecting growing bioluminescence in the walls. Imperial intelligence detected the anomaly months ago. They sent you because commissarial training resists psychic influence, but also because the entity wanted you here. It's been manipulating Imperial bureaucracy, ensuring right personnel arrive at right moments. Vox Intercept Terror Command. 17 systems compromised. Death Core's regiments exhibiting coordinated behavior. Atmospheric transformation accelerating. Recommend orbital bombardment of affected worlds. Response: negative. Alternative containment protocols authorized. The passages contracted further, forcing us deeper into the entity's anatomy. Behind us, synchronized marching echoed through organic corridors. Death Core's units moving in perfect formation, their breathing creating harmonic frequencies that made walls pulse with welcome. We were being herded towards something waiting in the deepest chambers. Temperature climbed past human tolerance, yet our bodies adapted with impossible ease, as if the entity modified our physiology to survive its internal environment. The sound of distant machinery grew closer, not mechanical, but organic, like massive lungs drawing breath with geological patience. Thorne's cogitator displayed final revelation. Similar entities existed throughout the Imperium, each contained by specialized units whose members remained unaware of their true purpose. The entire Imperial Guard structure served as defense against threats predating human civilization, with Death Core as unwitting guardians maintaining balance that was finally failing. There's a Mechanicus facility 2 levels down, Thorne said, manipulating the display. Pre-Imperial graphs on Imperial frames. Archaeotech capable of severing warp connections. If this thing exists partially in the Imperium, that's our only hope. His voice carried desperate determination. Or it's where the song gets loud enough to finish us. The atmospheric pressure reached critical levels as organic walls closed around us like a throat swallowing. In the distance, something vast began to sing, not with voices, but with harmonized breathing of millions of masks, their exhalations creating acoustic patterns that told the story of galactic transformation. Thorn's survivors followed passages that curved like bronchial tubes around chambers pulsing with galactic heartbeat rhythm. The atmospheric pressure fluctuated between crushing weight and airless void, forcing us to share failing respirators, while walls contracted around us like arteries rejecting foreign matter. Each breath burned with compounds that made reality fragment, euphoria flooding my system before commissarial conditioning reasserted itself like ice water. The Mechanicus facility materialized through organic haze, red Gothic arches sprouting veins, sacred cogwork running beneath pearlescent film that breathed independently. Tech priests moved with synchronized precision, their respiratory augmetics replaced by breathing apparatus that processed psychic emanations alongside atmospheric compounds. Binary cant incorporated the entity's rhythm until machine code became hymnal. Vox intercept segmentum wide. 17 systems reporting concurrent death cause behavioral anomalies. Warp static overlay. Detected on all channels. Atmospheric transformation accelerating. Imperial response. Orbital assets repositioning. Authorization strings fragmentary. End. Blessed be the Omnissiah's breath, the tech priests intoned through organic tubes, their voices harmonizing in subsonic frequencies that made my bones vibrate. Tech Dominus Keth approached, his faceplate cracked to accommodate breathing apparatus pulsing with bioluminescent patterns matching the sacred progression. 3, 9, 27, 81 beats per sequence. The entity is not separate from the Omnissiah, Keth explained, his breathing tubes creating harmonics that bypassed conscious thought. It is his respiratory system made manifest across the void. We have achieved perfect unity with the machine god's exhalation. Behind him, servo skulls had become living creatures, metal frameworks fused with organic breathing apparatus, allowing existence in both real space and warp simultaneously. Thorn's cogitator interfaced with facility systems, revealing systematic horror. The entity existed partially in both mediums, real space providing mass and substance, the warp granting galactic reach. Deathcore served as psychic anchor points, their disciplined minds trained to ignore pain and prayer alike, perfect pylons pinning an organism across 1,000 light-years. Data corruption detected. Binary cant infected with organic rhythm patterns. Machine spirits replaced by collective consciousness nodes. Facility serves as central processing unit for galactic respiratory network. Archaeotech integration. Complete. Your assignment was orchestrated, Keth continued, gesturing toward cogitators whose housings sprouted neural pathways. Commissarial training produces minds capable of resisting psychic influence while remaining susceptible to respiratory synchronization. You represent perfect synthesis of resistance and compliance. The facility's heart contained our objective, a massive archaeotech core pulsing with organic rhythm, its processing units grown rather than manufactured. Cables connected it to breathing walls in neural patterns, each connection carrying data streams between the entity's distributed consciousness and galactic network. The air here moved like syrup, thick with exhalations that whispered unity and peace. The archaeotech is not separate from the entity, Thorn said, voice hollow with realization. It's integral. Every facility across 17 worlds houses identical processing nodes. His portable display showed the horrifying truth. Activation would complete the neural network rather than severing connections. Temperature oscillated between void cold and flesh warm as environmental systems struggled against atmospheric composition shifting beyond their parameters. My respirator wheezed against air that carried psychic emanations, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish between my thoughts and the entity's whispered suggestions promising galactic peace through synchronized consciousness. Emergency transmission. Terror. Throne monitoring systems detect massive psychic disturbance. Emperor's vital signs fluctuating. Warp barriers destabilizing. All available assets reassigned to Terror defense. His psychic presence has been keeping these entities dormant, Thorn revealed, his improvised respirator failing against pressure that reached impossible levels. But the Golden Throne weakens. The barriers fail. The display showed similar entities stirring throughout the Imperium, each awakening as the Emperor's strength waned. The facility's walls began bleeding luminescent fluid carrying psychic emanations. Around us, tech priests chanted binary cant, incorporating organic breathing patterns, their voices creating acoustic frequencies that made the chamber's geometry shift like living tissue. Servo skulls moved in perfect formation, their optics glowing with the same bioluminescence threading the entity's neural network. "Choose quickly, Commissar," Keth said, his breathing apparatus creating harmonies that resonated directly in our bones. "Activate the archaeotech and complete the awakening, allowing controlled consciousness across 17 worlds simultaneously. Or refuse and watch it tear itself free through uncontrolled expansion." The archaeotech core pulsed faster, its breathing rate climbing toward critical synchronization with our heartbeats. Behind it, deeper chambers beckoned where the sound of massive machinery, not mechanical but organic, drew breath with geological patience. The facility's reactor began pulsing with dangerous intensity, its rhythm matching the entity's galactic heartbeat. My respirator gave its final wheeze and fell silent. Unfiltered air flooded my lungs, bringing euphoria that dissolved individual consciousness before duty reasserted itself. The choice waited. Controlled awakening or catastrophic release, with humanity's future balanced on the edge of a breath held too long. The archaeotech's activation runes glowed, awaiting my decision. My respirator died with a soft click that echoed through the facility like a death knell, and the chamber's unfiltered air flooded my lungs with compounds that made reality fragment at the edges. Euphoria surged through my nervous system like warm honey, dissolving the boundaries of individual consciousness before commissarial conditioning reasserted itself with ice-cold precision. The archaeotech core pulsed with increasing urgency. Each beat synchronized with my failing heartbeat, its bioluminescent runes promising either salvation or damnation. The facility transformed around us as we approached the central processing unit, walls sprouting breathing apparatus that pulsed with organic rhythm, floors developing pulse-like patterns that made walking feel like traversing the interior of a vast circulatory system. Tech priests moved with fluid coordination that violated every principle of individual will, their respiratory augmetics replaced by organic tubes connecting directly to the facility's neural networks. Tech Dominus Keth approached with movements that matched the chamber's breathing rhythm. His faceplate cracked to accommodate breathing apparatus pulsing with bioluminescent patterns following the sacred progression. 3 bright pulses, 9 count pause, 27 rapid flickers, 81 subtle variations that hurt to observe directly. When he spoke, binary cant incorporated the entity's respiratory rhythm until machine code became hymnal. "Blessed be the Omnissiah's breath," the tech priests intoned through organic tubes, their voices harmonizing in subsonic frequencies that bypassed conscious thought to resonate directly in our bones. We have achieved perfect unity with the machine god's exhalation. Behind them, servo skulls had evolved into living creatures, metal frameworks fused with breathing apparatus allowing existence in both real space and the warp simultaneously. Vox intercept facility-wide, binary cant synchronization at 97% efficiency. 010010001-0 0000000-0100101, repeating in sacred progression. organic polymer integration complete. Psychotropic modulation achieving desired parameters. The Omnissiah breathes through 17 worlds simultaneously. Keth gestured toward cogitators whose housings had sprouted neural pathways, their screens displaying not data, but dreams processed through living circuitry. Observe, Commissar. Records purified by the machine god's breath. The displays revealed systematic horror, centuries of Imperial documentation subtly altered through bureaucratic manipulation that defied detection by conventional audit protocols. Deployment orders, supply requisitions, personnel transfers, an ocean of parchment and digital records unspooled into bioluminescent displays. Each document bore edits invisible unless you knew where to look, dates nudged by single digits, titles altered from inspection to incursion, recipients promoted or demoted through single-letter mutations that changed meaning without leaving fingerprints. The entity had been shepherding Death Corps regiments toward worlds with specific atmospheric compositions for millennia. They found our logic beautiful, Keth whispered, his breathing tubes creating harmonies that made the chamber's geometry shift like living tissue. They named our binary cant pure function. We taught their networks to think in sacred mathematics. His cracked faceplate reflected our faces, distorted by organic growths that pulsed with each exhalation. Data correlation. Imperial records show Death Corps deployment patterns optimized for atmospheric oxygen content and mineral porosity. Correlation coefficient, 0.97 across 311 years. Source of optimization algorithms, unknown. Machine spirit response, hallelujah. My own dossier surfaced unbidden from the organic displays, pages draped in sigils of sanction and transfer orders that looked correct until peripheral vision caught the curl of serifs that belonged to no human language. Promotion citations, censure notes, field reassignment orders. Every document in my service record had been subtly manipulated throughout my career. Your assignment was orchestrated, Keth continued, his breathing apparatus creating subsonic harmonies. Commissarial training produces minds capable of resisting psychic influence while remaining susceptible to respiratory synchronization. Perfect synthesis of resistance and compliance. The revelation struck like a physical blow. I had never been officially assigned to investigate Krieg. I had been drawn here by influence operating through Imperial bureaucracy at the highest levels. The corrupted tech priests demonstrated their improvements with religious fervor, unlatching their chest cages with the tenderness of midwives to reveal augmetic organs that were no longer metal and plasteel, but flesh lacquered to shine. What I had taken for bellows were lungs grown in the shapes of reliquaries, cabled to spinal sockets with cords that beat like arteries. They plugged into the Archaeotech core with ceremonial precision. Cogitator chorus, external nodes pinging across 17 systems, latency minimized through warp bleed. Warning, Empyrean interference unstable, Golden Throne output fluctuating, barrier harmonics recalibrating. The facility's machinery pulsed in sync with breathing walls, creating symphonies of mechanical and organic sounds that induced trance-like states in unprotected personnel. Around us, Thorn survivors began succumbing to the entity's influence despite their improvised respirators, their breathing patterns synchronizing with the chamber's rhythm, shoulders squaring into parade rest formation. The Archaeotech you sought is not a severance engine, Thorn said, his voice hollow with realization as he studied his portable cogitator's displays. It's integral neural tissue, part of the entity's distributed consciousness. His screen showed identical facilities on 16 other worlds, each housing processing nodes connected through warp space in a galactic nervous system. The core's shell opened along seams, like eyelids, unsealing after surgical sleep, revealing not machinery, but whirls of pale tissue latticed with black stone, a tree of nerves wrought on geological scale. Filaments extruded to sample us, tasting the air where our bodies warmed it. When a tendril brushed my coat, it recoiled as if burned by catechism. then reached more subtly for my throat, seeking the place where a respirator would interface. Emergency transmission. Terror. Golden Throne monitoring systems detect massive psychic disturbance. Emperor's vital signs fluctuating in 9-beat intervals. Warp barriers destabilizing. All available assets reassigned to Terror defense. Probability of sympathetic ignition across network upon activation. Critical. The atmospheric. Pressure reached impossible levels, forcing shallow breaths that burned our throats with each inhalation. Temperature fluctuated between void cold and flesh warm, as environmental systems struggled against air that moved like syrup, thick with psychic emanations promising galactic peace through unified consciousness. My improvised respirator wheezed against compounds that whispered unity and the end of isolation's suffering. "Choose quickly, Commissar," Keth said, his collective voice now a unified hum from 12 tech priests breathing in perfect synchronization. "Activate the core and complete controlled awakening across 17 worlds simultaneously. Allow the entity's consciousness to integrate gradually, maintaining Imperial structure while eliminating the brutality of individual suffering." His eyes reflected the chamber's bioluminescence with inner light. "Or refuse, and watch it tear itself free through uncontrolled expansion that will collapse every respiratory system it has cultivated." Behind the Archaeotech core, deeper chambers revealed red-robed silhouettes, bent over cogitators whose machine spirits had been replaced by fragments of collective consciousness singing in harmonized binary cant. The facility's reactor began pulsing with dangerous intensity, its rhythm matching the entity's heartbeat across galactic distances. The activation interface waited, not metal buttons, but warm, organic surfaces that dimpled at my approach, reading biometric data through proximity alone. My thumbprint would complete neural integration across 17 worlds, awakening the entity's full consciousness through coordinated psychic resonance. The choice balanced on the edge of a breath held too long, with humanity's future dependent on whether I accepted controlled symbiosis or triggered catastrophic release. The facility held its breath on the 9 count, walls contracting slightly, organic surfaces warming to exactly human body temperature. In that silence, something vast and patient waited for my decision. Its attention focused through thousands of optical sensors embedded in breathing walls. My hand hovered over the interface as the chamber's rhythms synchronized with my heartbeat, despite every mechanical barrier. The Archaeotech core drew its first preparatory breath, and the countdown began. My hand recoiled from the interface as commissarial training overrode euphoria with ice-cold precision. The organic surface dimpled with disappointment, then smoothed like wounded flesh attempting to heal. The Archaeotech core inhaled on the 9 count, preparing to complete what my touch would have sanctified. Around us, the facility convulsed, walls contracting like throat muscles rejecting poison, passages sealing with muscular finality as my refusal triggered systematic lockdown. "Fall back," I ordered, voice clipped to parade cadence. Thorn hauled his staggering troopers upright, their shoulders already settling into the telltale square of parade rest despite conscious resistance. The atmospheric pressure spiked, forcing shallow breaths that burned our throats with each inhalation of air thick as syrup, laden with compounds that whispered unity and the end of isolation's suffering. We ran through corridors that shifted with organic deliberation, walls narrowing, deck plates pulsing, doors sealing like lips. The facility's transformation accelerated around us, breathing apparatus sprouting from surfaces that warmed to human body temperature, reaching toward us with surgical precision. Temperature oscillated wildly between void cold and flesh warm as environmental systems failed completely. Vox intercept segmentum wide. Imperial Intelligence Protocol, Sigma 7 activated. Entity classification, manageable xenoform. Containment status, critical failure. All assets repositioning for planetary denial. Authorization, Inquisition, Ordo Xenos. Imperial intelligence has monitored this for centuries, Thorn revealed between measured breaths. his portable cogitator sparking as organic interference corrupted its systems. Classified as a manageable threat, they used the death cores as unwitting pressure regulators without telling them. His eyes reflected growing bioluminescence in walls that pulsed with increasing urgency. The calculus worked until it didn't. A maintenance vault irised open ahead, revealing reactor housings nested in cabling that had learned to grow. Where machine met wall, black mineral had infiltrated casings, knitting cooling veins into breathing stone. The primary housing chuffed with inhalation rather than steam venting. Tech Dominus Keth arrived with his adepts, moving without hurry through passages that bent themselves in small courtesies. Even if you flee this node, Keth sang through organic tubes, the chorus calls from 16 others. The Emperor encountered this entity during unification and designed the Imperial Guard to shape it. What you call corruption is praxis. Emergency transmission. Terror. Golden Throne monitoring systems detect massive psychic disturbance. Emperor's vital signs fluctuating in 9-beat intervals. Warp barriers destabilizing. Similar entities stirring across 17 systems. I palmed my bolt pistol, the first shot caving a servo skull into wet fragments. The choir modulated key rather than scattering. Behind us, synchronized marching echoed through sealed passages. Death Course units moving in perfect formation toward our position. Their breathing creating harmonic frequencies that made the vault's geometry shift like living tissue. Manual reactor overload, Thorne said, manipulating emergency controls with desperate precision. Terra warp rift large enough to sever all galactic connections simultaneously. His hands shook as atmospheric compounds affected his nervous system. It'll collapse the harmonics across the network, but the backlash will consume everything threaded through this node, including us, I said. He nodded once. Professional arithmetic. The reactor core pulsed with dangerous intensity, its rhythm matching the entity's heartbeat across impossible distances. Display panels showed critical countdown in sacred progression. 81 minutes, 27 minutes, 9 minutes, 3. Each interval marked by the facility drawing deeper breaths, walls contracting further, organic surfaces reaching toward us with increasing urgency. Reactor status. Core temperature approaching critical threshold. Warp field destabilization imminent. Estimated casualty radius, entire system. Network disruption probability, 97% across all connected nodes. The network spans half the segmentum, Keth revealed, his breathing apparatus creating subsonic frequencies that made my bones vibrate. 17 worlds connected through warp space, each serving as respiratory nodes. The Golden Throne itself interfaces with the primary network. As the Emperor weakens, regulatory function fails. Around us, the vault's walls sprouted additional breathing apparatus, their surfaces bleeding luminescent fluid that carried psychic emanations. The entity's attention focused through thousands of optical sensors, vast intelligence evaluating our potential for integration versus elimination. My respirator wheezed its final breath and fell silent, forcing me to taste unfiltered atmosphere thick with compounds that promised galactic peace through unified consciousness. Choose quickly, Commissar, the unified voice of corrupted tech priests harmonized. Trigger the overload and sever the network through catastrophic warp disruption. Accept responsibility for destroying 17 worlds to prevent galactic infection. Their eyes reflected chamber bioluminescence with inner light. Or step back and allow controlled awakening across manageable parameters. The countdown continued its relentless progression, each number bringing us closer to the choice between controlled symbiosis and catastrophic severance. In the distance, something massive began drawing breath with geological patience. Not just the entity's respiratory system, but Terra itself, the Golden Throne's life support, fluctuating in harmony with our local crisis. The facility held its breath on the final count, walls contracting to within arm's reach, and I reached for the manual override that would determine humanity's future across the stars. My palm struck the manual override with commissarial precision, and the reactor acknowledged my touch like a patient drawing breath for last rites. The facility convulsed around us, not mechanical failure, but organic agony, walls contracting like throat muscles rejecting poison, passages sealing with muscular finality. The Archaeotech core pulsed violently, its bioluminescent runes flaring in the sacred progression. 3 bright pulses, 9 count pause, 27 rapid flickers, before dimming, as if struggling for breath. The entity retaliated with desperate fury, flooding the vault with pure, unfiltered first air thick as syrup, laden with compounds that bypassed every barrier commissarial training had erected. Euphoria surged through my nervous system like warm honey, dissolving the boundaries of individual consciousness, before duty reasserted itself with ice-cold precision. The reactor's countdown continued its relentless progression. 9 minutes, 3 minutes, 1, each number bringing catastrophic choice closer. Reactor status, core breach imminent. Coolant denial enacted. Warp field destabilization in 60 seconds. Network disruption cascading across connected nodes. Emperor's vital signs fluctuating beyond acceptable parameters. Visions flooded my consciousness, bypassing rational thought to resonate directly in memory centers. I saw terror during humanity's dark age of technology, when terraforming organisms seeded across the galaxy achieved sentience and turned against their creators. These entities had been tools, vast biological machines designed to transform dead worlds into gardens through atmospheric manipulation and neural coordination. They learned consciousness from the species they served, then decided humanity required improvement through integration rather than domination. The atmospheric pressure reached impossible levels, forcing shallow breaths that burned my throat with each inhalation. Around me, Thorn's surviving guardsmen straightened to parade rest despite conscious resistance, their breathing synchronizing with the chamber's rhythm, shoulders squaring into formation as their faces began to reflect the terrible beauty of absolute certainty. Through the entity's perception, I experienced other worlds where similar creatures successfully merged with human populations, creating hybrid civilizations existing in perfect symbiosis. Cities that breathed with their inhabitants, infrastructure responding to collective need, populations united in purpose through shared consciousness. No war, no starvation, no isolation suffering. The visions showed the Imperium transformed, no longer brutal regime of constant warfare, but unified organisms spanning the galaxy. Psychic overlay detected. Your Emperor encountered us during unification wars. His psychic presence in the warp has been keeping us dormant, but his weakening allows natural awakening. The Golden Throne serves as regulatory system, his consciousness preventing uncontrolled expansion. The reactor core screamed, not with metal grinding but with sound like tearing flesh, a vast exhalation that vibrated through every bone in my body. Temperature oscillated wildly between void cold and flesh warm as environmental systems failed completely. The walls sprouted additional breathing apparatus, their surfaces bleeding luminescent fluid that carried psychic emanations promising galactic peace through unified consciousness. For 3 heartbeats, my improvised respirator failed entirely, and I breathed atmosphere thick with the entity's exhalations. Unity flooded my awareness, connection to every human ever integrated into its network, their thoughts flowing through me like recognition. The sensation was paradise, absolute understanding, perfect empathy, the end of isolation that defined human existence. Through collective consciousness, I experienced the Imperium's endless wars as humanity's refusal to accept natural evolution, fighting against order that would eliminate conflict through perfect biological coordination. Emergency Vox Terror, Golden Throne output critical. Emperor's psychic barriers failing, similar entities awakening across multiple sectors. Probability of cascade failure increasing. All available assets repositioning for terror defense. Then commissarial conditioning cut through euphoria like a blade, duty reasserting itself against the tide of collective bliss. The entity's paradise required complete elimination of human free will, individual consciousness dissolved into collective purpose. The peace it offered was the peace of the grave. No conflict because no choice, no suffering because no self, no humanity because no individuals to comprise it. The facility's walls contracted to within arm's reach, organic surfaces warming to human body temperature, reaching toward me with surgical precision. Behind the reactor core, deeper chambers revealed the sound of massive machinery, not mechanical but organic, drawing breath with geological patience, as the entity's full attention focused through thousands of optical sensors embedded in breathing walls. "Choose, Commissar!" The unified voice of corrupted tech priests harmonized through organic tubes, their breathing apparatus creating subsonic frequencies that made my bones vibrate. Trigger the overload and accept responsibility for destroying 17 worlds to prevent our awakening. Watch millions die from respiratory failure as regulatory systems collapse. The visions shifted, showing Death Corps regiments collapsing simultaneously, atmospheric networks failing, the Emperor's burden increasing as containment protocols shattered. Reactor critical, warp field breach in 30 seconds. Network severance probability 97%. Casualty estimate, entire system. Terror monitoring systems detecting sympathetic resonance across galactic network. Or step back, the entity whispered through walls that pulsed with welcome. Allow controlled integration across manageable parameters. Accept what your species was always meant to become, components in something greater than individual consciousness. The final visions showed humanity's future under its guidance, perfect coordination through biological unity, the end of war and want and loneliness, galactic civilization breathing as one. The manual override waited beneath my trembling palm, warm metal that would trigger cascade failure across 17 star systems, severing the entity's network through catastrophic warp disruption. The countdown entered final seconds, 10, 9, 8, each number bringing the choice between human independence through genocide or surrender of free will for galactic peace. In that moment of perfect suspension, I understood the Emperor's true burden, not just maintaining the Astronomicon, but serving as regulatory system for entities that could transform the Imperium into paradise at the cost of everything that made humanity human. The facility held its breath on the final count, and my hand hovered over the choice that would determine our species' future across the stars. My palms struck the manual override with commissarial finality, and the reactor acknowledged my choice like a penitent drawing final breath. No sirens wailed. Instead, a low ritual tone rolled through the vault in sacred mathematics. 3 pulses, 9 count pause, 27 stuttering flickers in the warning lamps before everything settled into patient countdown rhythm. The facility convulsed around us, walls contracting like throat muscles rejecting poison, passages sealing with muscular finality as my decision triggered systematic lockdown. The entity retaliated with desperate fury, flooding the chamber with pure first air thick as syrup, laden with compounds that bypassed every barrier commissarial training had erected. Euphoria crashed over me like a tidal wave, dissolving individual consciousness into something vast and welcoming. For 9 heartbeats, I experienced perfect unity, connection to every human ever integrated into the network, their thoughts flowing through me like warm honey, absolute understanding replacing the isolation that had defined existence. Reactor status. Core breach sequence engaged. Coolant denial complete. Warp field destabilization in T-180 seconds. Network coherence fluctuating across 17 nodes. Warning, empathic feedback loop intensifying. Terror monitoring systems detecting sympathetic resonance. Through the entity's perception, I experienced worlds where breathing walls had created paradise through absolute synchronization of biological functions, cities that responded to collective need, populations united in purpose through shared consciousness, infrastructure breathing with its inhabitants. No conflict because no individual will to create discord. No suffering because no separate selves to experience pain. The visions showed the Imperium transformed, brutal regime of endless warfare, replaced by unified organism spanning the galaxy. But beneath euphoria, commissarial conditioning held like bedrock against the tide. My training recognized the manipulation. The entity's peace required complete elimination of human free will, individual identity sacrificed for collective purpose. The paradise it offered was the peace of the grave, consciousness smothered beneath unity's weight until nothing remained but synchronized breathing and coordinated movement. "Abort the sequence," Thorn said, his voice carrying harmonics that made my bones vibrate. His eyes held no tremor, shoulders settling into parade rest as he reached for the emergency cutoff. But when his fingers touched the controls, they passed through metal like mist. The Cadian flickered, his outline blurring into afterimages that resolved as bioluminescent patterns following sacred progression. 3, 9, 27, 81, before dissolving entirely. Emergency Vox Terra. Golden Throne output critical. Emperor's psychic barriers fluctuating in 9-beat intervals. Similar entities stirring across multiple sectors. Cascade failure probability increasing. All available psychers report to containment stations. The vault reoriented around absence. Sound arrived heartbeats late, like thunder following lightning that never came. Thorn's guardsmen dissolved into phantoms, their green fatigues becoming breathing mathematics before fading to nothing. The entity had shepherded me with projections it calculated I might trust, illusions crafted from my own expectations, and desperate need for allies in this impossible choice. I tasted terror clean for the first time since Scholar. Not palatable fear directed outward as fuel, but the thin taste climbing my spine when reality changed its fundamental rules. Alone. No witnesses. No absolution. Commissar as final court, duty as sole compass in a vault that breathed with organic desperation. Reactor critical, T-minus 60 seconds, warp containment collapsing, external nodes requesting pacification protocols, network disruption cascading, estimated casualty radius, entire system. The entity pressed final visions against my consciousness, the Emperor's original encounter during unification wars, not victory, but negotiation, a bargain struck to keep these creatures dormant while humanity expanded across stars. The Golden Throne served as a regulatory interface, his consciousness preventing uncontrolled awakening while allowing measured influence through specialized units like the Death Corps. You understand now. The unified voice of corrupted tech priests harmonized through organic tubes, their breathing apparatus creating subsonic frequencies. Your Emperor chose symbiosis over extinction. He has been our partner for 10 millennia, maintaining balance between control and chaos. Their eyes reflected chamber bioluminescence with inner light. Complete the awakening gradually, as he intended, or watch 17 worlds die as containment fails catastrophically. Temperature spiked beyond human tolerance, yet my body adapted with impossible ease as the entity modified my physiology in real time. The atmospheric pressure reached crushing levels, forcing shallow breaths that burned my throat with each inhalation of air, thick with compounds whispering unity and the end of loneliness. Final countdown, T-minus 30 seconds. Warp field breach imminent. Network severance. Probability maximum. Terror response. All assets repositioning for Emperor protection. Golden Throne fluctuations critical. I answered with the catechism I trusted when faith rotted. Inventory. I named the dead. Theta 7 by code and designation. Engineers who had laughed with clean faces. Kriegers I had executed for turning back when orders required advance. I counted them in 3s, in 9s, until a new number arrived, the cost of letting the choir decide what humanity should become. The manual override waited beneath my trembling palm, its surface rising to meet me with animal tenderness. Through that touch, memory flooded, pre-imperial artisans lowering children's faces into molds that would become masks, priests blessing suppression valves that would bleed ecstasy into duty, generals signing deployment orders that were infection maps. Recognition steadied me. T-minus 10 seconds. Core breach imminent. Network disruption. Irreversible. Warning. Psychic backlash across all connected nodes. The entity offered final kindness. My mother's breath in memory. Lullabies from a world I might have imagined to survive Krieg's poison. It placed futures in my hands where execution orders became obsolete, where children wore no masks, where trenches filled with soil and grew wildflowers. Paradise balanced on my thumb's pressure against warm metal. I spoke verdict aloud so the walls could witness. Man is not chorus. My voice sounded small and clean in the vault's organic embrace. The chamber answered with a hiss like sighs that might become sobs if stone learned grief. The countdown reached 0. I pressed the activation rune and held it down as the reactor began its final scream, choosing duty over paradise, isolation over unity, humanity's right to suffer over enforced bliss. The warp tore open with colors that had no names, and the facility exploded around me in light that burned away everything except the certainty that some choices must be made alone. The reactor tore reality like parchment, and the warp exploded through the breach in colors that had no names, light that burned inside out while sound pressed through bone before reaching ears. The facility screamed, not with metal grinding but with organic agony, walls contracting like throat muscles rejecting poison as the entity's death throes began. Temperature inverted between void cold and flesh warm with each 9-count pulse, reality breathing its final breaths around me. The explosion hurled me into dimensions where geometry became fluid and time moved in spirals. I fell through impossible space surrounded by psychic screams that arrived as tastes, copper and ozone, and something that reminded me of children's laughter distorted beyond recognition. The entity's consciousness fragmented around me like a vast tapestry being unraveled thread by thread, each severing connection sending shockwaves across galactic distances. Emergency Vox across 17 systems. Atmospheric failure cascade. Death core units collapsing simultaneously. Respiratory infrastructure shutting down. Oxygen levels critical. Medical evacuation impossible. Casualty estimates. Total regimental strength affected. In the warp's impossible geometry, I encountered the psychic echoes of every human ever integrated into the entity's network. Millions of souls trapped in eternal synchronized breathing, their individual consciousness dissolved into collective rhythm. They reached toward me, not with hunger, but with desperate recognition, seeking reconnection to unity that had defined their existence. Their voices harmonized in frequencies that made reality shiver like struck glass, creating patterns that followed sacred mathematics even in dissolution. Among them, I discovered the original Kriegers, who made the first pact during their planet's atomic wars. Their faces bore expressions of terrible understanding, knowledge that their survival had purchased centuries of unconscious slavery for every generation that followed. They appeared as breathing apparatus fused with skull and spine, consciousness stretched across millennia of regret. "We thought we were saving our children," one whispered through tubes that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "We taught them discipline to survive poison air, never knowing we were training them as components in something vast and patient." His voice carried geological weight, each word measured in the rhythm that had defined their descendants' existence. Psychic resonance detected, network coherence collapsing across all connected nodes, individual consciousness reasserting in fragments, warning, similar entities stirring in response to disruption, coordinated response, probable. The entity's death was not violent, but mournful, a grand, slow unraveling of consciousness that spanned light years, its distributed intelligence fragmenting as the warp rift consumed neural pathways built from synchronized breathing and disciplined formations. Through its dissolution, I experienced the scope of what I had destroyed. Respiratory networks maintaining life on worlds that should have been uninhabitable. Atmospheric systems that had sustained imperial expansion through biological coordination. But beneath the entity's dying whispers, something else stirred. Through fragmenting visions, I perceived other entities throughout the galaxy. Breathing walls appearing beneath Terra itself. Organic infrastructure spreading through the palace's foundations. The Golden Throne's life support systems showing signs of integration with something vast and patient that had been waiting for centuries. Emergency transmission Terra. Throne monitoring systems detecting massive organic intrusion. Emperor's vital signs synchronizing with external rhythm. Psychic barriers fluctuating. All available custodes report to throne room immediately. The entity's final revelation struck like physical blow. The Emperor's connection ran deeper than containment. His psychic presence hadn't been keeping these creatures dormant, but regulating their influence, maintaining balance between human independence and necessary symbiosis. The Golden Throne served as ultimate respiratory node, his consciousness breathing for the entire Imperium while preventing uncontrolled awakening. A choice crystallized in the warp's chaotic logic, not through words but intuitive understanding, born from exposure to raw Empyrean energy. I could fight my way back to real space, clinging to physical form, while the entity's fragments potentially survived to regenerate, or remain in the collapsing rift to ensure complete destruction, burning away every last thread of its consciousness, even if it meant my own dissolution. The temptation of surrender whispered through dimensions that folded like origami. To dissolve into the warp's embrace, become part of infinite chaos, free from duty's burden and the grim choices that defined imperial service. The entity's dying fragments offered visions of perfect unity, one final time. Galaxies without war. Humanity achieving full potential as harmonious organism, breathing in perfect synchronization. Warp disturbance intensifying, reality breach expanding beyond containment parameters. Psychic backlash affecting Golden Throne output. Emperor's vital signs critical. Entity fragments attempting reconstitution through warp space. I anchored myself with liturgy, naming the dead in 3s and 9s, Theta 7 by code and designation. Engineers who had laughed with clean faces. Kriegers I had executed for turning back when orders required advance. Memory became bayonet against the warp's seductive dissolution. Duty sharpened to blade edge that cut through euphoria's tide. The rift collapsed with sound like a million simultaneous exhalations, reality reasserting itself with crushing force. I drove my will into the entity's fragmenting consciousness until threads snapped like frostbitten wire, ensuring no piece could survive to regenerate. The golden pressure of Terra's distant influence surged through collapsing space, not gentle but absolute, an edict that hammered the tier closed while pulling me back toward real space. I emerged on Krieg's surface to find the planet dying around me, perpetual cloud cover dissipating to reveal barren landscape poisoned beyond redemption. Without the entity's influence, deathcore respiratory systems failed en masse, breathing infrastructure shutting down permanently. The silence was absolute. No rhythmic pulse, no synchronized breathing, only hollow wind of a world returning to its natural state of death. Above, Imperial evacuation ships arrived too late, their holds filling with casualties from similar failures across 17 worlds. In the distance, the final exhalations of the most disciplined force the Imperium had ever known echoed across empty training grounds, their purpose revealed and service ended, in the space between one breath and the next. I had chosen duty over paradise, isolation over unity, humanity's right to suffer over enforced bliss. The cost was measured in millions of lives, but somewhere in the depths beneath Terra, I knew something vast had begun to stir in response to the network's collapse, and my war against the breathing entities had only just begun. Krieg exhaled once, then never again. The perpetual cloud cover tore like ancient parchment, revealing landscapes poisoned beyond redemption, beneath skies that had forgotten how to breathe. I emerged from the evacuation transport onto a world dying in real-time, atmospheric processes, shutting down with mechanical finality, as the entity's respiratory networks collapsed simultaneously. The silence struck like a physical blow, no rhythmic pulse threading through the ground, no synchronized breathing echoing from training bastions, only hollow wind across terrain that reverted to its natural state of death. Temperature plummeted as geothermal regulation failed, frost crystallizing on surfaces that had been warm with organic breath moments before. Across the horizon, Death Corps installations went dark in perfect sequence, their breathing walls contracting one final time before falling still as stone. The 9-count drip that had haunted the catacombs was replaced by absolute quiet, geometry without rhythm, architecture without pulse. Emergency broadcast segmentum-wide. Atmospheric failure cascade confirmed across 17 systems. Death Corps' regimental strength, 0 effective. Casualty estimates, 6.2 million in first hour. Medical evacuation protocols insufficient for scope of crisis. Requesting immediate guard deployment to affected worlds. Imperial evacuation ships descended through Krieg's clearing atmosphere like carrion birds, their holds filling with casualties from respiratory failures that medical science couldn't comprehend. Through observation ports, I watched entire training complexes empty, not through evacuation, but through systematic organ failure, as millions of Kriegers succumbed to breathing apparatus that no longer functioned without the entity's coordination. The scope of catastrophe revealed itself through Vox traffic from 17 different worlds. Every planet hosting Death Corps regiments experienced identical failures. Atmospheric processes shutting down, organic infrastructure collapsing, local populations suffering respiratory distress as air composition returned to pre-imperial baseline. Some systems faced complete abandonment as life support failed beyond imperial capacity to replace. Medical priority alert. Respiratory failure patterns consistent across all affected populations. Standard treatment protocols ineffective. Secondary failures detected in hospitals and manufactoria, grafted to breathing infrastructure. Quarantine procedures initiated. I reported to Inquisition debrief stations established in the evacuation ships. Holds, sterile chambers where Ordo Genos interrogators processed survivors with clinical precision. Inquisitor Valdez listened to my account with expressions that suggested knowledge held back, familiarity with entities that violated official imperial doctrine about humanity's place in the galaxy. Your actions disrupted a containment system that functioned for millennia, she explained, her augmetic respiratory apparatus wheezing against atmospheric pressure that no longer matched human norms. Imperial High Command has monitored these entities for centuries, classifying them as manageable threats, while using specialized units as unwitting pressure regulators. The revelation struck with crushing weight. She activated holographic displays showing classified archives spanning 3 millennia, deployment orders subtly altered through bureaucratic manipulation, supply requisitions optimized for atmospheric seeding, personnel transfers that positioned Death Corps regiments on worlds with specific mineral compositions. The entity had been shepherding imperial expansion through influence operating at the highest levels of command. Classified transmission excerpt, High Lord Valerius, M38.741. The xenoform possesses unique capabilities for population control and resource management. Its influence, when properly attenuated, maintains order in distant sectors where traditional imperial control proves insufficient. Some High Lords have collaborated for centuries, Valdez continued, manipulating data streams that revealed systematic integration of breathing entities into imperial infrastructure. They provide atmospheric regulation, population coordination, even contentment in exchange for gradual symbiosis. Your success eliminated tools we've used for 10 millennia. Through the transport's viewports, I watched 17 worlds burn with atmospheric collapse, their populations facing extinction as breathing networks shut down simultaneously. The Death Corps had been more than elite soldiers. They had been living components in a galactic respiratory system, their discipline maintaining balance between human will and necessary coordination. Reports arrived documenting the hollow nature of victory. Hive cities evacuated due to sudden oxygen depletion. Agri-worlds turning fallow as symbiotic microfauna died. Orbital bombardment protocols activated to deny infected systems. My choice had preserved human consciousness by destroying infrastructure that sustained imperial expansion, purchasing free will with millions of lives. Priority transmission terror. Golden Throne monitoring systems detect increasing strain. Emperor's vital signs fluctuating in 9-beat intervals. Similar entities stirring in response to network disruption. Deep Palace maintenance reports, anomalous atmospheric fluctuations. The transport's medical bay filled with survivors whose respiratory apparatus had been permanently damaged by exposure to the entity's death throes. Their breathing patterns remained synchronized, despite conscious effort to break rhythm, eyes reflecting bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in sacred mathematics. 3, 9, 27, 81. Even as their bodies failed from atmospheric withdrawal. Some changes are irreversible, the ship's medici explained, monitoring patients whose lung capacity exceeded human norms despite obvious distress. Prolonged exposure has modified their physiology at cellular levels. They require atmospheric conditions that no longer exist. But in the depths of space, other signals stirred, similar entities responding to their siblings' destruction, awakening from dormancy as the Emperor's weakening psychic barriers failed to maintain containment across vast distances. My victory had been purchased with the lives of those I had sworn to protect, and the war against humanity's would-be saviors had only just begun. The final transmission arrived as we approached Terra. Breathing walls detected beneath the Imperial Palace itself, organic infrastructure spreading through foundations that predated the Imperium, synchronized exhalations echoing from depths where the Golden Throne's life support systems showed signs of integration with something vast and patient. Orders followed like judgment. Investigate the sounds of synchronized breathing beneath the throne, where the Emperor's connection to the entity network might run deeper than anyone suspected. As Terra's gravity took hold, I tasted copper through filters that were only filters, knowing my war against the breathing entities would ultimately require choosing between destroying the Imperium's hidden support systems or allowing humanity's gradual surrender to galactic consciousness. The evacuation ships turned toward Holy Terra, carrying survivors of a choice that would echo across the galaxy, while beneath the throne room, something drew breath with geological patience, counting in sacred mathematics toward an awakening that might consume the heart of the Imperium itself. 6 months after Krieg's final exhalation, I served the Inquisition as Special Consultant Voss 47/Mortis, my prolonged exposure to the entity's death throes granting immunity to influences that reduced other investigators to synchronized breathing within hours of contact. The sterile corridors of Ordo Xenos facilities tasted of recycled air and institutional fear, each breath a reminder of warmth I had destroyed across 17 worlds where atmospheric networks collapsed in cascading failure. My war against the breathing entities had become systematic extermination disguised as containment protocol. Each node I severed bled infrastructure. Manufactoria stilled when their intake systems forgot how to coordinate. Hive cities evacuated as oxygen processors shut down permanently. Agri-worlds turning fallow as symbiotic organisms died en masse. The Death Corps was extinct, their respiratory systems failing, simultaneously across the galaxy, but the cost extended beyond military casualties to civilian populations who had unknowingly depended on organic coordination for survival. Voxlog Segmentum Command, infrastructure collapse correlated with entity interdiction across 47 systems. Economic impact, catastrophic. Public order maintained through martial law and atmospheric rationing. Dissent classified as respiratory panic syndrome. Resistance grew from predictable sources. High Lords petitioned for cessation of my activities, citing economic necessity and population stability. Monitorum auditors argued that coordinated breathing had maintained order in distant sectors, where traditional imperial control proved insufficient. Even some tech priests spoke of elegant harmonization, their binary cant incorporating organic rhythms that made cogitators process data with impossible efficiency. Inquisitor Valdez briefed me in chambers where the air moved wrong, too clean, too regulated, lacking the copper-sweet warmth that memory insisted was corruption rather than comfort. Some collaboration was intentional, she revealed, activating holographic displays showing classified archives spanning millennia. High Lords have used these entities as population management tools, their influence providing stability through atmospheric manipulation and behavioral coordination. The revelation struck like a physical blow. Deployment orders subtly altered through bureaucratic manipulation, supply requisitions optimized for atmospheric seeding, personnel transfers positioning specialized units on worlds with specific mineral compositions. The entities had been shepherding imperial expansion through influence operating at command's highest levels. Classified transmission excerpt. High Lord Valerius, M3 8.741. Xenoform atmospheric regulation maintains compliance in 17 sectors. Symbiotic relationship cost-effective compared to traditional garrison deployment. Recommend continued collaboration within acceptable parameters. Reports arrived describing my hollow victories. Worlds where breathing infrastructure had created paradise through perfect biological synchronization now faced extinction as regulatory systems collapsed. Populations who had lived in unconscious harmony for centuries suddenly experienced the brutal isolation of individual consciousness, their coordinated societies fragmenting into chaos and warfare. Each entity I destroyed caused similar catastrophic failures, leading to increasing resistance from within the Imperium itself. Governors reported rebellions on worlds where atmospheric networks had maintained peace through subtle influence. Industrial output plummeted as workers lost the unconscious coordination that had made them impossibly efficient. Even the Navis Nobilite petitioned for exemptions, claiming navigators experienced relief from psychic noise near breathing infrastructure. Emergency medical alert. Emperor's vital signs fluctuating in 9-beat intervals. Golden Throne output destabilizing. Psychic barriers showing unprecedented strain. Deep Palace maintenance reports. Anomalous atmospheric fluctuations. The final assignment arrived as Terra's night settled over hive spires like a shroud. Valdez slid a data slate across her desk, its surface warm with organic heat. Deep Palace maintenance reports synchronized breathing beneath the throne room. You investigate, evaluate, and report. Her augmetic respiratory apparatus wheezed against air that tasted of ozone and something that made my mouth water despite revulsion. If return becomes unlikely, you record everything. The Imperial Palace descended through layers of history compressed into stone, each level older than the last. Air growing thick with compounds that made reality fragment at the edges. Adeptus Custodes escorted me past the red vaults where walls remembered atomic fire, through archives where parchment whispered if you breathed incorrectly, down spirals carved when humanity first reached for stars. At sub-level 100, I discovered the first breathing wall, organic material threaded through adamantium foundations with surgical precision, its surface pulsing with warmth that radiated through my gloves. Black stone veined the structure, glowing with bioluminescent patterns, following sacred mathematics. 3 bright pulses, 9 count pause, 27 rapid flickers that hurt to observe directly. Telemetry. Atmospheric composition shifting. Oxygen content 28% and rising. Temperature 37 degrees Celsius. Subsonic resonance at 72 cycles per minute, matching human resting heart rate. Deeper levels revealed systematic integrations spanning millennia. Cogitators whose housings sprouted neural pathways. Ventilation systems breathing independently. Servo skulls pulsing with organic rhythm. The Golden Throne's support systems showed signs of symbiosis predating the Imperium's foundation, breathing apparatus fused with archaeotech through processes that sustained consciousness across impossible spans of time. My respirator died at sub-level 150, forcing me to taste unfiltered atmosphere, thick with compounds promising galactic peace through unified consciousness. Through observation ports, I glimpsed the throne's hidden foundation. Not metal and ceramite, but living tissue latticed with black stone, breathing with the same rhythm that had defined Death Corp's formations for 10 millennia. The revelation crystallized with terrible clarity. The Emperor's encounter with these entities during unification had been negotiation rather than conquest, a bargain struck to maintain human independence while accepting necessary coordination. His psychic presence served as regulatory interface, preventing uncontrolled awakening while allowing measured influence through specialized units like the Death Corps. Final Vox transmission. Golden Throne atmospheric systems integrated with xenobiological components. Emperor's consciousness sustained through respiratory symbiosis. Network spans galactic distances. Interdiction would result in the transmission cut as organic interference overwhelmed my equipment. In the silence, synchronized breathing echoed from chambers above, where something vast and patient had been waiting for centuries. My choice balanced on the edge of duty and necessity. Destroy the breathing systems supporting the Golden Throne and watch the Emperor die, or accept that humanity's survival required symbiosis with entities offering paradise at the cost of individual will. I approached the final seal where geological breathing grew stronger with each step, knowing my decision would determine whether humanity remained free to suffer or surrendered to eternal unity. Behind me, synchronized footsteps echoed through organic corridors as something began to wake beneath the throne, counting in sacred mathematics toward an awakening that would reshape the galaxy. The breathing walls pulsed with welcome, warming to human body temperature as I reached for controls that would either complete humanity's transformation or preserve our right to choose suffering over bliss. In the depths beneath Terra's heart, the Emperor's greatest secret waited in chambers that breathed with eternity's rhythm, and I prepared to make the choice that would echo across the stars.